You know, there's something nobody really talks about enough. We reach 60 and suddenly the world seems to think we've figured it all out. Or worse, that we're done figuring anything out at all. But here's the truth. The desire for connection, for intimacy, for feeling truly seen by someone, that doesn't retire when we do. If anything, it becomes clearer, more honest. I've spoken with so many women who tell me they feel invisible in this stage of life, especially when it comes to relationships. And yet, the men in our age group, they're looking for something too. Something real. Something that goes beyond what they might have settled for in their younger years. This isn't about changing who you are to please someone else. Absolutely not. This is about understanding what creates genuine connection now, at this age, with all our experience, our scars, our wisdom. Because the truth is, what men want from a woman after 60 might surprise you. It's often simpler than we think, yet deeper than what we were taught to offer when we were younger. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore 5 things that matter most to men at this stage of life. Not superficial things, not about looking a certain way or playing games. These are the qualities that create lasting bonds, the kind that make both people feel more alive, more themselves. And the first one? It's something I wish I'd understood decades ago, because it changes everything about how we show up in relationships. What men truly want after 60 is authentic companionship. Now let me be clear about what that really means. Authentic companionship is not about becoming someone's nurse, housekeeper, or social coordinator. It's not about managing his medications or making sure he eats his vegetables. Now don't get me wrong, we care for the people we love, and that's beautiful. But if that's the foundation of your relationship, something essential is missing. Authentic companionship means he wants you, your thoughts, your laughter, your presence. He wants to sit with his morning coffee and hear what you think about the book you're reading, or that documentary you watched, or even something ridiculous you saw at the grocery store. It's the difference between someone who shares your space and someone who shares your inner world. I think of my friend Margaret. She told me about a moment with her partner Robert just last month. They were sitting on their back porch as the sun was setting. Nothing fancy, just an ordinary Tuesday evening. Robert started talking about his father, memories from childhood he'd never shared before. Margaret didn't try to fix anything or offer advice. She just listened. And then she told him about her own complicated relationship with her mother. They sat there for 2 hours, and she said it felt like they'd traveled somewhere together without leaving their chairs. That's authentic companionship. It's also about supporting each other's individual passions without making them into joint projects. When he wants to spend Saturday morning at the woodworking shop, you're genuinely happy for him. Not because it gives you me time, but because you love seeing him engaged in something that lights him up. And he feels the same way about your painting class or your hiking group. Real companionship means you can be together without agenda. You're not always planning, organizing, or improving. Sometimes you're just being, watching a movie and actually discussing it afterward, taking a walk and pointing out things you notice, cooking together and laughing when something goes wrong instead of treating it like a crisis. It means intellectual stimulation matters. He doesn't want someone who just nods along. He wants someone who challenges his thinking, who brings new perspectives, who makes him see the world a little differently. After 60, most men have spent decades in conversations that stayed on the surface. They're hungry for depth. And here's what surprised me most when I really understood this. Authentic companionship requires vulnerability. It requires both people to show up emotionally, not just physically. Which brings us to something crucial that makes this kind of companionship possible. Emotional availability and vulnerability. I know those words might make you want to skip ahead. They sound like therapy speak, don't they? But stay with me, because this is where so many relationships after 60 either deepen into something extraordinary or stay stuck in pleasant but distant politeness. Here's what most people don't talk about. Men at this age are often desperate for emotional connection, but they've spent a lifetime learning to hide it. They grew up in a world that told them emotions were weakness. that real men solve problems rather than discuss feelings, that vulnerability was something to avoid at all costs. My friend Tom told me something that broke my heart. He said, "I spent 40 years in a marriage where I never cried in front of my wife. Not once. When my mother died, I waited until I was alone in the garage." He's with someone new now, at 67. And he told me the most liberating thing about this relationship is that when his eyes well up during a touching movie, she doesn't look away uncomfortably or change the subject. She just reaches for his hand. That's what emotional availability looks like. It's creating a space so safe that the walls can finally come down. But here's the thing. You can't demand vulnerability. You can't say, "Open up to me," and expect it to happen. It doesn't work that way, especially with men who've been conditioned for decades to keep everything locked down. What you can do is model it yourself. I learned this the hard way. I used to think being strong meant never showing my fears, never admitting when I felt lost or uncertain. I thought I was being independent and capable. What I was actually being was closed off. When I started sharing my own vulnerabilities, not dumping, not making it his job to fix me, but simply being honest about my inner life, everything shifted. I remember telling David about my fear of becoming irrelevant, of feeling invisible as an older woman in a youth-obsessed culture. I wasn't asking him to solve it, I was just being real. And you know what happened? 2 days later, he told me about his own fear of losing his mental sharpness, something he'd never admitted to anyone. My vulnerability gave him permission for his own. So practically, what does this look like? It means when he shares something difficult, you don't immediately jump to solutions. Men get enough of that in the world. Everyone trying to fix, to problem solve, to move on quickly. What they're often starving for is simply being heard. When he talks about his disappointment that his son moved across the country, or his worry about his declining health, or his regret about career choices made decades ago, just listen. Really listen. Not with one eye on your phone, not while mentally preparing your response, but with your full attention. Validate what he's feeling without judgment. That sounds really hard, is more powerful than, "well, at least," or "you should." Those responses, however well-intentioned, shut down emotional sharing faster than anything else. And here's something crucial. Don't weaponize vulnerability. If he shares something tender with you, that information is sacred. You don't bring it up during an argument. You don't share it with your friends without permission. You don't use it to prove a point later. Trust is built slowly and destroyed quickly. I think about Linda and Paul. Paul finally opened up about feeling purposeless after retirement, about missing the identity his career gave him. Linda didn't minimize it or offer cheerful platitudes. She shared her own struggle with purpose after their children left home. They started taking morning walks where they could talk about these deeper things. Not every day, not forced, but when the moment felt right. Paul told me those walks saved him from a depression he didn't even realize he was sliding into. The beautiful paradox is this: when you create space for emotional vulnerability, you're not making the relationship heavier, you're making it lighter. All that energy that goes into pretending, into maintaining walls, into keeping up appearances, it gets freed up for actual connection. This kind of emotional openness naturally leads to something else that men deeply value at this stage of life. Something that might surprise you. Something that might surprise you. Thing number 3, respect and admiration, not just tolerance. Here's what I need you to understand. Tolerance is not respect. Tolerance is putting up with someone. Respect is actively valuing who they are. I see this confusion everywhere. A woman will say, "I respect my husband," but what she really means is, "I tolerate his quirks without complaining too much." That's not the same thing, not even close. Men at this age have lived full lives. They've made decisions, built things, survived failures, learned hard lessons. They've developed skills, accumulated wisdom, formed opinions based on decades of experience. And what they're looking for isn't someone who merely tolerates their presence. They want someone who genuinely appreciates what they bring to the table. My friend Margaret had been married to Tom for 38 years when she finally understood this distinction. She'd stopped really seeing him years earlier. When he'd talk about his work restoring antique furniture, She'd nod politely while thinking about her grocery list. When he'd share an opinion about something in the news, she'd smile vaguely, already dismissing it. She wasn't mean about it. She just wasn't there. Then Tom started spending more and more time in his workshop. Margaret complained to me that he was distant, but when we really talked about it, I asked her, "When's the last time you actually acknowledged something he's good at? When did you last celebrate something he accomplished?" She couldn't remember, so here's what respect looks like in practice. When he shares an opinion, you engage with it. You don't have to agree. Respect doesn't mean becoming a yes woman, but you treat his perspective as worthy of consideration. You ask questions. You think about what he's saying instead of waiting for your turn to talk. When he does something well, you notice it. And I don't mean patronizing praise like you're his mother. I mean genuine appreciation. The way you handled that difficult conversation with your brother, that took real skill, is different from, "Good job, honey." One treats him as a capable adult you admire. The other treats him like a child who completed a chore. My partner David is exceptional with our grandchildren, patient in ways I'm honestly not. For years I took it for granted. Then I started specifically acknowledging it. The way you explained that math concept to Emma was brilliant. You have a real gift for teaching. You should have seen his face. It mattered. Here's the harder part. Respect also means what you don't do. It means not nagging, not criticizing in front of others, not rolling your eyes when he tells a story you've heard before, not belittling his interests even if they're not yours. I watched my neighbor Susan systematically destroy her husband Frank's self-esteem over years of small cuts. Frank can't even figure out his phone. She'd joke at dinner parties, "Don't ask Frank for directions, we'll end up in another state." She thought she was being funny. He stopped talking in groups entirely. The truth is, when a man feels respected and admired by his partner, something shifts in him. His confidence grows. He wants to be better. He wants to contribute more. Respect doesn't just make him feel good, it actually brings out his best qualities. But, and this is crucial, respect cannot be faked. And it absolutely must go both ways. If he's not treating you with equal respect and admiration, that's a different conversation entirely. This isn't about performing deference to keep the peace. It's about mutual appreciation between equals who genuinely value what each brings to the relationship. When you get this right, when you're both operating from a place of genuine respect, it creates a foundation for something else that remains vitally important at this stage of life. The physical connection that many people assume fades away but actually transforms and deepens in ways that might surprise you. Let me be direct. Physical intimacy doesn't stop mattering after 60. For many men, it remains a vital expression of love and connection. But here's what does change, and this is important. The meaning of intimacy itself often expands and evolves. My friend Margaret thought her husband Richard had lost interest in her. They'd gone weeks without any physical connection. Finally, after much awkwardness, they actually talked about it. Turns out he was terrified. He'd been having some erectile difficulties and was so embarrassed, he'd been avoiding all physical contact rather than risk what he saw as failure. She had no idea. She'd been creating her own story about not being attractive anymore. That conversation changed everything. Not because it magically solved the physical issue, but because it opened a door they'd kept closed for too long. Here's what I've learned. The men who are happiest in their relationships after 60 are the ones whose partners understand that intimacy is about connection, not performance. Yes, sex can still be wonderful, and for many couples, it absolutely is. But the pressure to perform like you're 40 creates anxiety that actually interferes with pleasure. What works is focusing on what feels good, on closeness, on exploration without a specific goal in mind. I know a couple who started giving each other long back massages with no expectation of where it would lead. Sometimes it became sexual, sometimes it didn't. The removal of pressure actually rekindled something that had been dormant for years. And let's talk about what intimacy really encompasses, because this is where many couples discover new territory. Holding hands while you watch the sunset, cuddling on the couch during a movie, a kiss that lingers, dancing slowly in the kitchen, the feeling of his arm around you as you fall asleep. These aren't consolation prizes for real intimacy. They are real intimacy. My partner David and I have a morning ritual. We have coffee together in bed before the day starts, pressed against each other, talking or not talking. That physical closeness, that consistent affection, it's as important to our connection as anything that happens in the bedroom. Here's what doesn't work: avoiding the conversation entirely, making assumptions about what he wants or doesn't want, letting embarrassment or outdated ideas about what should be happening prevent you from discovering what actually could be happening. The research is clear on this. Couples who maintain physical affection, not necessarily sex, but touch, closeness, affection, report higher relationship satisfaction. Men in particular often express love through physical connection. When that disappears entirely, many feel rejected in a way that's hard for them to articulate. So how do you navigate this? You talk. Yes, it's awkward at first, but you're over 60. You've survived childbirth or menopause or career challenges or loss. You can handle an honest conversation about desire and intimacy. You might say, "I miss being close to you. Can we talk about what we both need?" Not accusatory, not demanding, just honest and open. You explore together. Maybe you discover that what you both want looks different than it did 20 years ago. Maybe you find that removing the pressure to perform actually increases desire. Maybe you learn that intimacy is less about frequency and more about quality and connection. And please, let's debunk this myth right now. Sexuality doesn't have an expiration date. The idea that people over 60 shouldn't be sexual or aren't sexual is nonsense. What's true is that it evolves. And often, it becomes more intimate, more connected, more about mutual pleasure than about meeting some external standard. The couples I know who figured this out, they laugh together. They touch each other throughout the day. They've let go of performance anxiety and embraced pleasure and closeness instead. They've discovered that intimacy at this age can actually be better because you know yourself, you know each other, and you're not trying to prove anything. Which brings me to something else these thriving couples have figured out. They haven't let their relationship become stale. They've discovered that keeping things interesting, creating new experiences together, finding ways to laugh and play. They haven't let their relationship become stale. They've discovered that keeping things interesting, creating new experiences together, finding ways to laugh and play, that's not optional. It's essential. Here's what I see happening to too many couples after 60. They fall into such predictable routines that they stop actually experiencing life together. Dinner at 6, television at 7, bed at 10, same conversation, same shows, same everything. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they become roommates who share expenses rather than partners who share a life. Men after 60, they want adventure. Not necessarily skydiving or mountain climbing, though if that's your thing, wonderful. But they want to feel like life still holds surprises. Like you're still discovering things together rather than just running out the clock. My friend Barbara and her husband Tom started taking cooking classes together at 63. Not because they needed to learn to cook, they'd been feeding themselves for decades, but because it was something new they could be terrible at together. They laugh about their failed soufflés. They experiment with recipes. They've turned their kitchen into a place of play rather than just another chore. Another couple I know volunteers at the animal shelter every Saturday morning. They come home with stories about the dogs they walked, the cats they socialized. It gives them something to talk about beyond their aches and pains and what the grandchildren are up to. The key is this: shared experiences create shared memories, and shared memories create intimacy. When you're building new experiences together, you're building new connection. This doesn't mean you need to spend a fortune or completely overhaul your life. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a different route on your daily walk, trying a new restaurant, playing cards instead of watching television, having a picnic in your living room on a rainy afternoon just because you can. What matters is the intention behind it. The decision to choose engagement over autopilot, laughter over routine, curiosity over complacency. And yes, you need to consider physical limitations and budget constraints. But those are parameters to work within, not excuses to stop trying. The couple who can't travel extensively might explore every park in their county. The couple dealing with mobility issues might take an online course together in art history or learn a language. The question isn't whether you can do everything, it's whether you're doing anything to keep your relationship feeling alive and interesting. Because here's the truth about relationships after 60, they either grow or they stagnate. And growth requires effort from both people. So let's bring this together. Companionship, respect, emotional intimacy, physical affection, shared experiences. These aren't complicated demands, they're the foundation of connection at any age, but they become absolutely vital after 60 when you've stripped away all the distractions, the career pressures, the child rearing, the endless busyness that used to fill the space between you. What men want after 60 is what you want too, to be seen, valued, and engaged with, to feel like you matter, to know that your presence in someone's life makes a difference. The beautiful part, you have more wisdom, more patience, and more clarity now than you've ever had. You know what matters and what doesn't. You can create the relationship you actually want instead of the one you thought you were supposed to have. Talk to each other. Be honest about your needs. Stay curious about who you're becoming. This chapter can be the richest one yet if you approach it with intention. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 resonated most? What would you add to this list? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this spoke to you, subscribe to After 60 for more conversations about making these years truly extraordinary.